At the crack of dawn, they stormed onto my property, 5 of them, all sporting HOA polos, clipboards in hand. One of them had a GoPro strapped to his forehead, acting like he was invading a war zone. And there she was, Karen, standing behind the gate, yelling orders like she was commanding a medieval army to seize a castle. They had no idea what they were walking into. You see, I train law enforcement K9s, and today the dogs were out of their usual routine, off-leash and ready for anything. What they also didn't know was that my dad writes the regulations for the regional power grid. And guess what? That's his grid they were messing with. I glanced over at him, and without missing a beat, I said, "You want to make an example?" He just smiled and said, "Hold my coffee." Now, you might be wondering how we went from regular suburban disputes to this kind of all-out chaos. Well, buckle up, because this isn't just a petty neighbor squabble. It's about trespassing, uninvited gatherings, territorial stakes, and a woman hell-bent on enforcing non-existent rules. And it all started with a trampoline. You see, my ranch is on the outskirts of the HOA zone. It borders a cookie-cutter suburban neighborhood where every house looks like it was churned out by a factory of beige, uninspired designs. I got 40 acres of land, some livestock, K9s in training, and kids who like to play outside. How dare they? My family moved out here for space, peace, and a little bit of freedom. Then came Karen. She bought the corner house where suburban life meets open country, like she thought she'd be the bridge between the city folk and the savages of the wild frontier. From day one, she started patrolling the boundaries, armed with a homeowner's handbook. The first week, she left a note about our unsightly fencing. By week 2, she was complaining about how loud our goats bleated during her afternoon meditation. By the 3rd week, she had the audacity to call animal control because she thought our chickens had aggressive energy. I didn't let it get to me, though. Out here, you learn patience. You breathe, you count to 10, and you wait for people to either get bored or get over it. But Karen, she wasn't going anywhere. Not after she manipulated her way onto the HOA board and started her own personal militia, the HOA Rangers, she called them. Yes, you heard right. Middle-aged men in matching vests, clipboards, radios, and laminated badges, acting like they were preparing for a suburban version of cops. They were supposed to enforce aesthetics, but their real mission seemed to be catching me or my kids doing anything remotely non-compliant. The thing is, I'm not even in the HOA. I never signed up, never paid dues, never agreed to their rules. But that didn't stop Karen. She claimed my property's proximity to the HOA zone meant I was somehow influencing the neighborhood ambience and should be held to their standards. I laughed it off until one day I heard the familiar buzzing of a drone above the pasture. Sure enough, it was Karen's drone, hovering over the kennels where I was training K9s. I yelled at her to move it, but she ignored me, so I did what anyone would do in my position. I walked into the barn, grabbed my 12-gauge, and turned her drone into a pile of confetti. Legally, I live in the county. You fly an unregistered drone over my property, especially near livestock and children, that's a bad decision. What followed was a 10-minute screaming match at the gate. Karen raged, called me a criminal, while I simply told her to call whoever she wanted. Then came the dawn assault. 5 of Karen's Rangers marched through the access path beside her fence, like they were planning to invade a war zone. Karen, in her bathrobe and pearls, barked orders like a general. One guy holding a body cam, another with measuring tape, and one with a Google satellite map. They headed straight for my kid's swing set. Apparently, Karen had decided it was too close to some imaginary boundary line she'd drawn. I sipped my coffee, calm and composed, watching them march into my yard. "Well, boys," I said under my breath, "you're about to meet the locals." The dogs had been out for their morning exercise, and they were off-leash, trained and ready. I whistled once, and just let the chaos unfold. The first ranger dropped his clipboard. The second one tried to climb the fence backwards. The one with the GoPro tripped over a garden hose and fell headfirst into a flower bed. One of my German shepherds rounded them up in a tight circle, while my retriever peed on their flag markers. Karen, from the sidewalk, was shrieking about lawsuits, but I wasn't paying attention to her. I was too busy calling my dad. Karen thought she was launching a righteous crusade. But what she didn't know was that half of the violations she'd circled on her Google map involved utility easements for the regional power grid. The swing set was sitting right next to one such buried line. The HOA had no jurisdiction here. I handed my phone to my dad. Want to make an example of this? He smiled. Hold my coffee. At that moment, the sheriff arrived, lights flashing. Everyone expected him to deal with the trespassers. But Karen ran straight up to him, waving her HOA bylaws, yelling about how I unleash dogs on innocent civilians. I saw the sheriff spot me, take off his hat, and grin. Morning, pal. You still training those bite units for the academy? I nodded. Want to see their performance review? Karen's face turned white. She was so angry, she couldn't even get a word out. She was standing there, looking like she had just been outwitted by a much smarter opponent. What neither Karen nor any of the HOA rangers realized was that this was about more than just barking dogs. When you trespass on land tied into federal infrastructure, fly drones without permission, and tamper with power access points, you're playing a game far above their pay grade. And tomorrow, the FAA will be paying Karen a visit. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're probably wondering what happened when Karen tried to press charges and realized who the sheriff used to work for. I wasn't about to let Karen pull anything else out of her sleeve. Sure enough, it didn't take long for me to catch wind of her next move. One day, I found a letter in my mailbox, stamped with the county's official seal. I ripped it open and scanned the complaint quickly. Karen had filed a report accusing me of violating community standards with my land use. The complaint was filled with vague claims about environmental risks, safety hazards, and, of course, my dogs being dangerous. It was the usual melodramatic nonsense, but now she had escalated it to the county. I couldn't help but chuckle. Did she seriously think I'd be intimidated? I wasn't. I gathered my documents and set up a meeting with the county office. Dressed in my usual jeans and worn-out flannel shirt, I walked in, fully aware that Karen, sitting across the room, thought this was already in the bag for her. She smiled at me smugly as though she had already won. I stretched out casually in my seat, not giving her the satisfaction of seeing me ruffled. If she thought she had the upper hand, she was in for a surprise. A clerk called us in, and we entered a small office where a middle-aged county official sat behind a cluttered desk. He adjusted his glasses as he glanced between us and flipped through the papers. All right, he began, studying the complaint. It's been reported that your property is being used inappropriately as an event space. There are hazardous materials on site, and your dogs pose a public safety threat. Is this correct? Before I could respond, Karen spoke up, her voice dripping with feigned concern. Yes, he has attacked dogs, and his property is dangerous. It's a hazard to the whole community. The official turned to me. Sir, do you have a response to these accusations? With a calm, collected demeanor, I reached for a folder from the side of my chair and handed it to him. I have evidence showing that Karen, along with over 100 others, trespassed on my property without permission. I also have security footage proving that my dogs did nothing more than do their job and patrol the land. They were trained and they acted accordingly. The official flipped through the papers and documents, while Karen's self-assured expression started to fade. I added, I also have a police report from the officers who responded that day. It confirms that Karen organized the illegal gathering, and that she had no right to be here in the first place. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. The official rubbed his temples and sighed, as if this whole situation was exhausting him. Ma'am, he said, turning back to her, do you understand that this complaint holds no legal weight? This is private property, and the HOA has no jurisdiction over it. There is no violation here. Karen's face reddened, a mixture of anger and disbelief. But I'm part of the HOA. I should have authority over this area. The official raised an eyebrow. That's not how property laws work. The HOA can only regulate properties whose owners have agreed to their rules. This land isn't even part of the HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. Her frustration was palpable, and she wasn't ready to let go. You can't just do this. You can't humiliate me in front of everyone. I couldn't resist a small, amused smile. Looks like I just did. The official leaned back in his chair and looked at her one last time. I suggest you stop filing baseless complaints. If you continue this, you may face legal consequences for wasting court's time. Karen stood up, storming out of the office without another word. I let out a deep breath, relieved. It was over. Karen had once again failed. That evening, I sat on my porch, Titan resting his head on my lap, as I sipped my drink, watching the sunset. The dogs were sprawled around me, relaxed. The tension was gone, and I was at peace. But just as I thought it was over, something told me it wasn't. The next day, I started noticing something strange. Orange flags appeared in my field again, dozens of them, marking my land in neat rows. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, some utility crew coming through. But no, these flags were placed far too carefully, too deliberately. I checked the security footage, and sure enough, there they were, Karen's self-styled HOA Rangers, 2 of them, sneaking through my property under cover of darkness, placing flags like they were preparing to mark out some imaginary territory. I wasn't about to let them get away with this. I called the sheriff, who showed up not long after. When he saw the footage, he laughed and said, "You know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say they're trying to provoke you." I simply smiled. I'm not angry. I'm patient, and I have receipts. I showed the sheriff everything. The footage of Karen's Rangers trespassing, the drone incident, her own flyers, and the harassment she had subjected me to. The sheriff nodded, impressed, and said, "Ever thought about suing for harassment?" I shrugged. "Not yet, but if she keeps poking the bear, she'll regret it." The real twist came when Karen made her biggest blunder yet. She filed a complaint with the county, claiming my dogs were a danger to the community. She even submitted photos of my dogs mid-jump during training, portraying them as unhinged beasts. Of course, she conveniently cropped out the fact that a trained police officer was standing right next to them, giving commands. The county sent an inspector, and after reviewing everything, the inspector simply nodded and said, "I don't see any violations here. Looks like someone's got a personal vendetta." That wasn't enough for me. I decided it was time to take action legally. I filed a formal complaint with my lawyer, detailing all of Karen's actions, including trespassing, harassment, and defamation. I attached evidence of everything: drone photos, surveillance footage, copies of her flyers, even a statement from the sheriff. I also reported her drone activity to the FAA, flying an unregistered drone over livestock and near power infrastructure. Big mistake. The next day, I received a white envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a single typed note: "We are not finished. The HOA has spoken. You've been warned." It wasn't signed, just a cryptic message. That's when I knew Karen wasn't done yet. She would keep escalating. But what she didn't know was that I had already escalated far beyond the HOA. With my dad's help and the legal documents I had, Karen's fate was about to be sealed. And when she finally got the letter from the FAA, well, she didn't see that coming. The next time Karen tried to mess with me, she would regret it, because the consequences for her actions weren't going to stop at a slap on the wrist. They were coming for her, and they weren't going to be pretty. Karen's latest stunt was nothing short of a disaster. She had the nerve to accuse me of inflicting emotional distress and claimed that my dogs were psychologically terrorizing her. Oh! And let's not forget the claim that my drone activities were vindictive and an absolute violation of her so-called community harmony. But the cherry on top, she accused my swing set of being an unauthorized structure built in defiance of HOA rules. Visual defiance. Because, of course, swing sets are the true enemy of suburban order. She even had the audacity to submit screenshots of my property, the drone wreckage, and some blurry photo of me standing next to my dogs. Of course, she had circled my head and labeled it aggressor. It looked more like a conspiracy theory poster you'd find in someone's dusty basement than anything remotely credible. When my lawyer saw the evidence, he couldn't stop laughing. He told me not to stress, predicting this would be tossed out faster than you can say unreasonable lawsuit. But I was done being on the defense. It was time to go on the attack. So I countersued, and I made sure it was airtight. Trespassing, harassment, defamation. endangering livestock, and attempting to create a public nuisance. It was all in there. I had videos, photos, eyewitness accounts, and even statements from HOA board members confirming that Karen had gone rogue. My attorney called it a surgical strike, and I had to agree it was the beginning of the end for Karen. The HOA board, which had been turning a blind eye to her actions, finally took notice. They realized Karen was dragging their reputation through the mud, and they didn't want to be implicated in her legal mess. A closed-door vote removed her from the board, and they dissolved her beloved HOA Rangers. It wasn't an apology, but was a statement that they wanted no part of her drama. They sent me an official letter confirming Karen no longer held any position or authority. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she wasn't going to take this lying down. I watched as she started patrolling the sidewalk in front of my property, binoculars in hand, jotting down notes. She even filmed my kids play with the dogs, claiming they were training attack maneuvers, and accusing my shepherd of giving her a threatening look. Seriously, she filed an animal complaint over a dirty look from a dog. And remember that swing said she wanted seized? Well, it turned out that it was placed exactly 4 feet inside a power easement, an easement that my dad's team had mapped. This meant it was on land that the HOA had no jurisdiction over. Better yet, this land was subject to different zoning rules that my dad literally helped create. I sent that information to the court as a reminder to Karen that if she wanted to argue about boundaries, she was going to lose. Meanwhile, the FAA investigation into her drone activity was progressing. They reviewed the wreckage, pulled her flight logs from the drone app, and confirmed she had violated at least 3 federal laws. When she tried to argue that she was gathering evidence for a neighborhood safety initiative, the investigator asked if she had authorization from any agency. Her response? She said she was self-authorized. That didn't go over well. She was hit with a hefty fine, a 4-figure penalty for flying an unregistered drone, violating airspace regulations, and endangering livestock. I didn't get to see her reaction when the letter arrived, but my neighbor did. He texted me, saying she had a full-on meltdown. The next day, Karen called an emergency neighborhood meeting at her house. She handed out typed agendas, trying to spin everything as a personal attack. She ranted about the decline of community standards, pacing around with a plastic wine glass in hand. It wasn't long before someone in the back asked, "If he wanted to silence you, wouldn't you already be quiet?" That was the moment Karen realized she'd lost the crowd. The room turned on her, and I could feel the shift. People started nodding and waving at me, offering support in small ways, cookies, kind words, and a few asking if I'd be willing to host a community dog training demo. A few days later, I got an email from the HOA board. They confirmed Karen had been removed from any role, and they were now reviewing her past actions. It was clear that her reign of terror had come to an end. But I wasn't done yet. I had my lawyer file for a restraining order based on all her trespassing, harassment, and defamation. The paperwork was solid, and Karen had no idea what was coming. She was about to find out that there were consequences for trying to push the wrong neighbor too far. A few days later, I noticed something strange. Karen was back at it, standing at the edge of my property line, binoculars in hand, observing me like I was some kind of spectacle. I didn't confront her. I just took a picture and sent it to my lawyer. The paper trail was growing, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. The next morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, containing a single typed note. "We are not finished. The HOA has spoken. You've been warned." I knew exactly what this meant. Karen wasn't done escalating. But what she didn't know was that I had already escalated it much higher. The next knock on her door wouldn't be from the sheriff. It was going to be from someone wearing a badge, and it wouldn't be long before Karen found out exactly what happens when you push the wrong person too far. I had one last move up my sleeve, something quiet, legal, and incredibly frustrating for Karen, something so small yet so infuriating she wouldn't be able to fight it. It was all about patience and a drone of my own. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud and dramatic. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is the subtle kind. I waited for the perfect moment. When the FAA fine had been served, the lawsuit had backfired. The HOA Rangers were officially disbanded, and the restraining order was slowly making its way through the system. Then I made my move. A legal, fully registered drone. Nothing too fancy. Just a simple tool that would allow me to prove my point. Every Saturday at 9 a.m., I'd launch my drone. I kept it within the limits of my property. Never fly into her airspace, but just high enough so that Karen could see it from her window. The first time I sent it up, she came running outside, yelling and shaking her fist in the air. I didn't even acknowledge her. I just sipped my coffee, watching the drone as it hovered calmly. She screamed about harassment, but I did nothing to provoke her. She called the sheriff, the same guy from before, and when he arrived, I handed over the necessary documents. Registration, GPS log, everything in perfect order. The sheriff gave me a thumbs up and left. Karen stood there, fuming, shouting after him, but the sheriff didn't even glance back. Over the next few weeks, the routine continued. I'd fly the drone on Saturdays, sometimes doing simple patterns, other times letting it hover. One time, I even attached a small banner that read, "Have a great day." It was harmless, but enough to drive Karen to the edge. She became obsessed, recording the drone every time it appeared. She built binders of screenshots and timestamps, even creating diagrams with little red circles around the drone. She tried to report again, but the FAA had flagged her as a nuisance complainant. Her caseworker sent her a firm email telling her to stop wasting federal resources. Then, the restraining order arrived. The letter was hand-delivered by a deputy, and Karen held it in her hands like it was a ticking bomb. She read it, then read it again, before storming off into her house without a word. The next evening, she didn't turn on her lights, and the house stayed dark, strangely quiet. By the next morning, a "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn. She didn't even try to hide it, just slapped the sign right down, hoping to start fresh somewhere else. Her listing went live almost immediately. Charming corner lot home in HOA community, ideal for peaceful suburban living. No mention of the legal battles, the drone wars, or the scandal she created. She probably thought she could just move somewhere else and start fresh. But she hadn't counted on the power of reputation. Word travels fast, especially in HOA circles. Buyers came and went, walking around the perimeter, asking questions. I kept it friendly, but didn't mention Karen. One potential buyer even came up to chat with me while I was working on the pasture. He was curious about the neighborhood. I gave him the usual spiel, emphasizing how quiet and peaceful it was, perfect for families or dogs. When he looked over at her house, he saw the security cameras and the faded flyers still stuck to the bulletin board. He nodded and moved on. Her house sat on the market for months. Price dropped twice. Meanwhile, my property value climbed. I was approved for an expansion to my dog training facility, added a new barn, and even got a small grant for therapy training for veterans. The community started coming together. Parents with anxious kids, couples adopting rescue dogs, and even retired officers who miss working with animals. I ran classes twice a week, free on Sundays. Word spread, and people stopped seeing my ranch as a chaotic, wild place. It became a valued part of the community. Karen, on the other hand, stayed hidden. I rarely saw her. When I did, she was either dragging trash bags to the curb or glaring at squirrels. She didn't leave her house much. The binoculars were gone. The flyers stopped. It was like watching the life drain out of her. One evening, I saw her dragging 2 heavy bags of trash to the curb, her robe hanging off one shoulder. She didn't look at me. She didn't glare. She just shuffled back to her house and quietly closed the door. Then one day, she was gone. No fanfare. No moving truck. Just an empty house with a listing that finally switched to under contract. The neighbors didn't ask where she went. No one cared. I stood at the fence, sipping my coffee, watching the drone make one last lazy circle over the field. I brought it down, powered it off, and smiled. Justice didn't come in a single blow. It came in quiet moments, through rules followed, receipts kept, dogs trained, and lines never crossed. It came when Karen's noise was replaced with silence, when the community she tried to rally against me turned their backs. It came when the very tools she used to intimidate me turned back on her. A few weeks later, a new family moved in, a young couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They stopped by to introduce themselves, asking if it would be okay for their dog to play with mine. Of course, I said yes. We talked for a while, and when they asked if there was anything they should know about the HOA, I just smiled and said, nothing they can't handle. Just make sure your drones are registered. The wife blinked. The husband chuckled. It was an inside joke, but I left it at that. The neighborhood was calm again, peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like things were exactly where they needed to be. Kara may have tried to fly too close to the sun, but I had my dogs, my land, and a quiet sense of victory. Thank you for watching Untold Realites. Don't forget to subscribe for more. Thumbs up and comments below.